No, maybe six. Yeah, I think it is. Sorry, I think it is about 6 billion. Sorry, about 6 billion. So I think every year it is somewhere between 60 and 80 billion every year.
Where is that money now?
That money is already constructing houses.
Under what law? What framework?
There is already a framework. Only the court said we fine-tune the framework. That money is already constructing houses under the framework with the Ministry of Housing. Some of it is being used we've already allocated to National Housing Corporation. And the construction of houses is going full steam across Kenya.
And we have the money, okay? We deducted, and so far we have collected about 32 billion of that money. We've spent about 3 billion, so about 29 billion is in our central bank account as we sit right now.
Okay, so you're the money guy. So what's happening here?
Jibambe.
You know, that's a very...
Explain.
Important question that you asked there. Look, up until, I think it was up until December, by which time most of the employers had submitted their returns for the housing levy itself, because that should happen at the 9th of every subsequent month. Yeah. So by 9th of January, they should have filed the returns for the month of December. And I was speaking to the president on the 17th of December 2023, and the question was, how much have you collected? Of course, there was a bit of confusion, but eventually he found that it was supposed to be between 60 and 80 billion shillings in a year. And he explains clearly that as you receive the money, you spend. So that was December 2023. On 20th of March 2024, the year of the Lord, should I add that?
The year of our Lord.
The Principal Secretary, Charles Hinga, was with Jeff Koinange, and he says that we have the money. So it is confusing that the president says the money has been spent. The PS responsible says that the money is at the Central Bank of Kenya account. So what is happening? Is it for the lack of the framework? Because the High Court had said there was no framework on how this money was going to be spent. Is that the reason why there was no clarity? That now there's a framework on how...
But Sam, is there a framework for this money already? Because the law was, the bill was signed into law on the 19th. Well, that's 2 days ago.
That's what I'm saying. So in December...
So even for this one,
do we have the
framework yet?
Clearly, the president speaks about there was a framework under the National Housing Corporation, but the High Court had found there was no framework. Today, there's an Affordable Housing Act signed into law on 19th. Still, PS Hinga says, and many other stakeholders, that the regulations will come. In fact, the law says, PS Hinga doesn't have to say it. Yeah. The law says that within 30 days, the Cabinet Secretary for Housing, in this case, Alice Wahome, should present the regulations to the House so that they can be looked at. So then one wonders, if you are talking about 32 billion shillings had been collected up until the month of December for the first 6 months. So if you have to double it, then that comes to about 64 billion shillings. There's a question of transparency and accountability here, because how come that all this time there has been no feedback, there has been no clear comment in terms of accountability explaining that this is the much that you're collecting in January month. It is always a range, including yesterday. The PS says that we've been collecting between 5 and 6 billion shillings. It has to be an exact figure. I mean, it should be possible to say that, because then once you do that, you're able to communicate to the country in a manner that is transparent. As we speak, and you'll be listening to Chairman of the Justice and Legal Affairs speaking about how much time it will require to pass the regulations, as we speak, there are those gaps that, yes, you will begin the deductions. They're saying that it should be immediate. But again, so you deduct from Jamila's salary for the month of March. I don't know if she's been paid or when it will come. But imagine...
You work for the same company.
I don't know about your salary.
No. Well, kuna
tunafanya kazi kwa kampuni moja.
Exactly.
So the act says that the deductions will take effect at the assent of the law, which is 19th. The PSA is that deductions will have to happen in March. I mean, monthly salaries are only paid once.
And they cover the first to the last.
From the first day of that month to the last day of that month. So if you have to make a deduction...
Starting the 19th?
Yeah. I don't know where they want to start it. But you cannot charge housing levy in this country for salaries paid between 1st and 19th of March, and you do it legally. So I don't know if there will be a circular from maybe the Kenya Revenue Authority or the Housing Department to Kenyans and to employers to tell them, this is what we expect you to do. But at the same time, most employers run their payrolls around mid-month.
Yeah.
So if someone has already run their payroll by now, what are you expecting them to do? So probably there will be certain guidelines on how that exactly should be done.
Maybe it'll be prorated from the 19th, because you see your salary is from the 1st to the 31st. But if it, and the taxes are then charged on the month's salary. But if you start doing it from the 19th, maybe it's the 12 days that are left of the month, and you sort of take your salary, divide by 31, and then take that tax and divide it by 31, and then times 12 for the remaining days. What do I know? I'm not one of those. But there's another issue that I wanted to discuss with this housing levy is, has it then cured, what was termed as discriminatory by the High Court with, shall we call it housing levy 1.0? Which was the salaried versus the non-salaried. We'll listen to Murugara in a moment on this issue, but even yesterday, P.S. Hinga talked about it, but then mentioned the ability to pay versus the responsibility to pay. And I'm not sure, and maybe we can sort of assist each other around the table, whether the issue has been decided, or even either the regulation or the framework or the method of how these monies will also be deducted from those who don't earn a salary every month and who are perhaps not in the iTax records. Let's listen to the chair of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee on this very issue, and whether there seems to be clarity on whether this issue has now been fully addressed.
It may be a little bit difficult because you have to establish the income of a person who is not salaried. Then you have to make a deduction on it. It may be enforceable on assumptions if the KRA and the other collecting agencies are able to establish what the income is. But essentially, a formula has to be devised, and this has to be contained in the regulations to come by. There is a provision to collect money from non-salaried Kenyans. What we are now supposed to do is regulations, which will actually set out how this money is to be collected from the non-salaried Kenyans, because it's a little bit tricky to establish the income these people are making so that you are able to deduct from it a certain percentage. But with the time and with more work into the regulations, we are likely to get it right.
So when do you foresee the collection to begin?
It's supposed to be immediate if it can be done without regulations, but if regulations have to come in, we must give them about 3-4 months, because once they are gazetted, they are to be tabled in Parliament, there has to be public participation, and then the Committee on Delegated Legislation has to approve them.
And that is the chair of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee in Parliament. And he says it's a little bit tricky and it'll take time. And we're right back to where we started with this that was then challenged in court. It's tricky, it'll take time, but the deductions start now. Linus, this is what you were talking about earlier before the break.
You actually need to play the clip of Honorable Murugara many times to just understand where we really are on this housing issue. That is exactly the confusion we are caught in. Because he says it's supposed to be immediate, but we also need regulations.
Which will take...
So KRA today went ahead and issued a circular that the collections begin this month. And Sam has walked us through the timelines. In real terms, government is supposed to be, in its administrative actions, it's supposed to be guided by a doctrine called reasonableness. Just being reasonable. Being reasonable is actually a logical thing. It's just functioning properly, like a reasonable Homo sapien. Even government is supposed to be functioning that way. Because what we have here is a pickpocket approach to tax collection. You know, it sounds like, okay, this is the corner. You know those dark spots?
Konambaya.
Konambaya. The dark corner is 19th, so it starts now. Frisk them, including those who have to wait for regulations. It could take 3 or 4 months, but you give us what you have. That is the situation we are finding ourselves in. The government is looking very and sounding very unreasonable by, first of all, working as if you do not understand how the employment space works, for example. Things like payroll, when are they falling due? For those who have, as you have correctly pointed out, for those who have already processed their payrolls, how do you chase those? Do you tell them again that, bring that back, your payslip back, we need to amend because we have to give some money to the affordable housing collection? We are not in a good space. That is the bottom line, because this housing levy is also just looking as unclear. By the way, sometimes I wonder between the two, which one has some clarity, whether it's the health one or the health one looks a bit
well, there are still is it 2 or 3 of the laws surrounding SHIF that are being litigated in court as we speak.
But at least they have pointed out and said SHIF will be the pocket, the basket where the money will go. Yeah. This one, KRA is going to collect, but you will not see it. They call it a tax. Yeah. So it is your 30-something plus 1.5. Plus 1.5. I don't know, how do you account for that? How do you exactly account, especially to the public? Because I think we're in another situation, just like we were not long ago, when we were told by the control of budget, that the money, the Eurobond that was borrowed, went into budgetary support. Because you don't see the line item where it goes. Yeah. So is this money that you can actually go to the budget and see and say, this is going to housing, this is what I'm contributing into housing? I think, as a country, I think we're in a space where we've agreed through our laws, the Affordable Housing Act, to shoot first and then aim later. It doesn't work quite well when that's the approach.
And Yvonne, remember, this was not in the manifesto. It was not in the plan, the Kenya Kwanza plan, when it was launched in June. Let me find the exact date. June 2022. This is a project that will run into billions of shillings, but the financing mechanism was not contained in the original plan. Yes, there was a plan about housing, and financial commitments were made during that time. But they were totally different from what we're seeing now, which is taxing 1.5% by the employer and the employee. It said, and I quote, the budget commitment of 50 billion shillings, with 200 billion shillings to be financed by pension funds, in brackets, assets under management, currently standing at 1.5 trillion shillings, and other collective investment schemes, including diaspora bonds. But the reality now, the government has abandoned its pledge and what they had agreed to do, and now is insisting on taking the tax route, Watu Walipe. And we've seen this plan being pushed by the government, despite all the hurdles it has faced with the court processes, with the stopping or postponing or appealing. And in fact, currently, the bill that has been signed into law, there is a case in court. And the court does says there is merit to what is being brought before court. Yes, the court has not suspended its implementation as it stands, but there's a case that will be had, I think, 16th of May. Yes. All sides have been asked to respond, to bring issues to the table. But then now, this raises fundamental questions about reality or ground. Once now things have changed, that you're in power. And Yvonne, you talked about how this housing plan was also there in the previous regime, and the courts stopped it. But the funding mechanism back then was totally different. When it was stopped by the court, it did continue. We did have houses that were built under the previous regime.
Yeah, because there's always going to be a plan to build houses in any administration.
Exactly, certainly. But is the plan to just tax and tax and tax? And you talk about how it's so easy to tax those in formal employment because you tax at source. But the question here, and you've mentioned it, is how do you get those who are not salaried? Do you think people will voluntarily because that's what I was looking at the statement. I think it took, maybe you can go into it, about the statement that's been released by the Kenya Revenue Authority this evening about it. It's almost saying, well, hata kama uko na biashara yako, you're not in formal employment, ujitole ulipe 1.5% of your salary. But how do we calculate how much 1.5% is of what you have or what you earn?
But also, if that had been effective, KRA would not be struggling with the issues that they have, which is widening the tax bracket, which has been an age-old question in this country, which is, how do you determine the earnings of people who don't have a salary? Then how do you find them, and how do you ensure they pay tax, which is what Pia Singa was talking about yesterday, the ability to pay versus the responsibility to pay. These are the questions. Again, and I think we've raised this so much across this table, and not just on this issue, and not just this year, but for years in this country, and I'm concerned that it seems to be a perennial problem. Process. Lack of understanding process. Murugara there mentioned what the process would be. That a law is passed, it is signed, a bill is passed, it is signed into law by the president, regulations follow. Those regulations are then subjected to public participation, and then they're given to the delegated legislation committee. And then it is regulations that then give the law the legs to stand on, the way in which it'll be done, the enforcement, if you like, capacity of a law. Why are we not following this? This is the same thing with SHIF. We constantly, for a while, asked for those regulations when the first thing we're being told is we will deduct. But there is a process to doing things, and surely you would imagine that the people, in these positions know what the process is. We've got parliamentarians who know how these things work, who know how, step 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we've said here, there's a way you cook ugali, there's a way you bake a cake. You can't do it the reverse.
Steps.
Yes, and then hope to have, a good outcome with it. And remember, with many of these things, by the way, including our elections, have been litigated in court based on process. BBI based on process. Legislation based on process. Surely if these steps are followed, and with clear communication, you'd have less litigation, you have clearer understanding, you have even people who then you would say would be willing to pay. But here we are again, let's do it first, but we can also do it later, but we have to do it later, but we have the frameworks, but we've collected this already, but we're going to collect this, but we're going to do this, but we're going to, we're going to open up a payroll. I mean, even with a salary advance, there comes a date. If you go to your employer and say, I need a salary advance, they tell you, no, payroll is closed. I mean, these are things that we should be able to clearly follow. And it's rather concerning when a government of all entities doesn't seem to follow processes that are clearly laid out.
And Yvonne, it must be noted here that everything that has been done with the Affordable Housing Act now has been deliberate. Remember, barely 7 days after the court judgment, there was a bill that was being published. In fact, it was tabled in Parliament, read the first time, and there was an attempt to even reduce the publication period so that public participation can be done quickly. And indeed, there was a plan to do the public participation, I think around, was it Christmas time? Or
just before
something thereabout.
Recess,
But then, of course, there were some court cases, a few things happened, but eventually the public participation happened, even though some people thought that was controversial. But the bill, the act now, in section 1, at the start of the bill, preliminary phase, it talks about this act shall come into operation as follows. A, on the date of assent, section 4 and 5, that is the one that imposes the levy. And then says in B, all other sections on such date as may be prescribed by the Cabinet Secretary in the Gazette, meaning the Kenya Gazette. Meaning it is very deliberate that the money has to come first. So that they can continue with the plan of accumulating the resources. If you look at the statement from the Kenya Revenue Authority, it says that effective 19th of March, that the housing levy shall become operational. It becomes law. And let me just quote it correctly so that I do not misquote anything here. They're saying that 1.5% of the employee's gross monthly salary by the employer. And they're saying this is supposed to be remitted to the Kenya Revenue Authority. So one wonders, of course, after acknowledging the 19th of March, what would it harm in this statement, which is just one page, what would it harm to give guidance on what is supposed to happen for the month of March? Because obviously this is a question that employers, employees, and even the non-salary Kenyans are going to deal with. There are those that do not know, because the claim here by the Kenya Revenue Authority is a charge on the monthly gross pay. So how do you deal with March? So if that is corrected, then we might be at a better place of understanding what's going on. But then the other questions that must be asked, and that is the question because eventually, if you look at the other form of taxation, whether it's value-added tax, whether it's the income tax on salaries or on companies and the profits they make, or it's the import duty, whatever other tax that we may talk about, you're taxed based on what you've done, what activity you have engaged in. And that money goes to finance different operations of the government. But now the housing tax is very specific. You see, VAT, you don't pay VAT so that you are funded for VAT, affordable VAT programs. No.
Yeah.
For housing, it is a housing tax to go into affordable housing.
Right.
Meaning this is specific. You can actually trace it. So if you say that it is tricky, so there are certain people that cannot be caught, they're not in the net. So what are you saying? Eventually when they start benefiting, they're also going to benefit as if they started paying from the first date? How does that work? Of course. The Principal Secretary is saying that any person who doesn't pay the levy will not benefit from the housing. That's what he says. It is not in the law. It is nowhere in the law. If the regulations are to come, they might indicate it in the regulations. It will be subjected to public participation. But then again, they might fall into problems because that would be discrimination again against people that cannot afford.
Yeah.
At the same time, shall they then say that if you are unable to pay, the government is going to pay for you like they have done with the social health insurance, the social health authority, the contributions to that? So that has to be dealt with. Secondly, these are public resources. The government owes the people transparency. You're taking 1 shilling from a Kenyan. How are you going to spend it?
Yes.
If you look at the financial planning in this country, first of all, the budget policy statement is taken to Parliament. So a lot of conversations with different departments, with different agencies. Then eventually, after all those conversations, the National Treasury comes and says, okay, now we have taken the report from all the conversations, and now we are presenting the budget estimates.
Yeah.
As you do that, there's also the Finance Act, which is sort of how are you planning to collect revenue to finance this particular budget. So this is how we want to spend money. These are the revenues we are targeting, but this is how we collect that revenue. What is happening to housing? We are hoping to collect up to 120 billion shillings in a year.
But we're also...
How are you planning to spend it? There's no clarity there. Because how much is a housing unit? I asked this question on Daybreak the whole of this week. Nobody appears to have an answer. And they said those are technical issues that should be asked to the relevant department. I watched...
But even the relevant department...
I watched PS Charles Hinga yesterday. There's no mention of that. So even if you're saying that people who earn 20,000 and less, or 20,149, these are the sort of programs that they are going to benefit, these are the sort of houses they're going to get, and even giving a rate of, say, 3,200 shillings for a one-roomed house for the person earning a maximum of 20,000, even if you say that, and it's not in the Act. So what are you speaking to?
That's right.
So Kenyans would be well guided to actually comply with the requirement as patriotic citizens without risking to go to Jongo Mayo. If there was clarity, if people knew that this is the sort of transparency mechanisms that have been put in place, so that at the end of the day, once you collect the 100 billion shillings, are they going to construct 200,000 housing units? I do not think so. So there's something else that you're not being told. So if it is going to be a public-private partnership, why is that conversation not being spoken about? The president in December said that all the money that had been collected, I'm hoping that was 32 billion shillings, had already been spent on the housing programs. PS Hinga says the money is at the Central Bank of Kenya. So who has been constructing the houses that are under development today? And if that has been happening without the housing levy, so what is housing levy coming to do? To help who? So when you speak to some of them, they say that the private developer will come and put up the house. Then they will recover their money through the sale of houses. So who is explaining that arrangement?
So
but also, then why am I being taxed if this is that arrangement?
Exactly.
Look, government, as a serious entity as it should be, cannot afford to be fuzzy with numbers. It should be very clear. We cannot have the head of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee who says it's tricky. I mean, these are just not things we should be hearing from people we have delegated responsibility and given the mandate to do so. We need answers, we need clear ones. These are the things that build trust. These are the things that will enable that non-salaried Kenyan to walk up to KRA and say, hi, these are my earnings for the month, the year, and therefore, how much do I owe you for housing levy? Here you go. We can't be fuzzy. We can't have different figures and different amounts. And we can't be hearing things like it's tricky. I'm sorry, it really does not inspire trust. And it says something about the people we elect, and who are given, even in that National Assembly, are given a position of leadership of an important organization like a Legal Affairs Committee. People who are given an important position as Principal Secretary. Because if there is anybody who would know better, they are the chief accounting officers of the ministry. These are answers that should be here and that should be very clear. When you ask a question, it's answered and it's very clear and and you get clearer understanding. But yet, the more they speak, the more confusion it seems to generate.
Yvonne, I was reading in the newspaper that some of them just passed the thing without reading it. Like, tumepitisha tu. Kama fulani amesoma, that thing of kama fulani amesoma, tumesoma hata sisi, but really.
Jamila, can I ask?
Yeah.
Weren't they told?
Wapitishe.
To pass that thing?
Yeah. So no.
I mean, if you talk about passing a bill, you just need to remember the story of the Finance Act 2023 and a little meeting in a stadium in Muranga the other day after some MPs discovered, it had other lines down there that spoke things that would affect the people in a different way. But I think I just wanted to mention that there is a way this whole housing conversation has been framed. It has been framed in an us versus them kind of prism. Where, and you've seen the president repeatedly talking about wale wako nayo hawataki wale hawana wapate. And remember, there is a consistent thread that goes all the way back to the election when he framed his campaign as hustlers versus dynasties. So don't forget that bit where there is a constituency the president and his team are addressing. And there are people who don't have homes, many in this country. And they actually, some of them are half persuaded that this is the path to getting them homes. But, I mean, this has to be interrogated a little bit more, in a more honest way, so that it's not just the emotive issue of getting a large section of the population thinking they are these salaried people who have condemned them to where they are. They don't have houses, they're in slums because of the people who earn salary, wadosi and all such things. First of all, so it's been a very divisive framing, very, very divisive. Us versus them. It's those who have, they don't want those who don't have to have. Yet that should not be the conversation that should be had about a situation like that. The plan should still and must be accountable to those who will contribute to it, including those who are not salaried, who are going to have to sell their chicken to actually be able to put some money into the housing scheme. The last issue that I think will continuously be interrogated, again, is the suspicious rush, the suspicious hurry. You know, if you just look at the entire governance ecosystem, there are a number of issues that really deserve this kind of energy. Whether you're talking about the CBC transition, which this administration came and found and went into it, we needed to see the housing-like energy when it comes to the CBC transition. You hear about the capitation. It's not going there. And school heads are complaining that you're not getting capitation. Yeah. Where is the energy? Why can't we see the same energy we are seeing in this collection of housing levy in education? Now there's a live situation, as we would say in television, and that is the doctor strike. Let's see your energy there as well, and resourcefulness, and the collective approach that we've seen when it comes to the housing scheme. Because if you don't display that consistency across issues, then we are bound to be suspicious. And we are Kenyans. We have seen houses and government housing, how it has worked before. We have seen affordable housing before, called the Nyayo House, Nyayo housing scheme. Yes. There are Nyayo estates around. Yes. Those were supposed to be, those were affordable houses. How affordable did they become? So not just the question of accountability that Sam is talking about, but also long term. Are we actually going to have these things on the ground? Because we are a country whose backyard is littered by some of these projects that are driven with a lot of ambition, with other interests that are not necessarily aligned to the project, and we end up somewhere. There was a time we were, as a country, considering manufacturing cars. We launched one.
Kuna kamoja kakumali
for
railways.
Kasarani.
Yes.
More International Sports Center Kasarani. There was a time actually we were considering a very efficient public transport system. And we introduced very affordable green buses called Nyayo buses. Yeah. But because there is something short-term about some of these political projects.
Remember BRT? We painted red lines on the road.
Yeah, we need to repaint because I think it's been... They're faded. and those are the kind of conversations that we need to have. And then, how about honestly having a conversation about the national priorities? Yeah. Are we really there? If we were to list, where would housing lie? I think health is really, really something admirable. It's been waiting. And the framing again, remember from, you won't be doing those fundraisers. And we know very well we do fundraisers to send people to hospitals, send people to India, do an operation here and there. Yeah. So in terms of the emotional appeal, the point has been made. But let's cut our cloth. What do we say in that?
Cut our coat according to our cloth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think housing right now lies at around number 4 or 5 in terms of national priorities. Yeah. There are good things nations do for greatness. We can't, for example, join the space race and launch rockets to space, to orbit the space the way Elon Musk is doing, because we are not there yet. I think sometimes we try to skip the queue and kitaturamba at some point.
You don't want to shoot for the stars?
That's interesting. And the last thing I just wanted to say, if Kenya was a private company, would you run a project in the manner the affordable housing is being run? You come up with how to collect the revenue, but are not looking at how it will be implemented, the KPIs.
But when you talk about the implementation and the KPIs, is the KPI for the housing levy to have affordable houses? Or is it jobs?
That has changed quite a few times.
So, it's just interesting. You have a housing levy, but it's jobs. Anyway, as we conclude, I want to read one message from our viewers here. It's a doctor I will not name. And says, please remind the CS, Nahumicha, that medical interns are not students. They are graduates with degrees in medicine from recognized universities, and they have a provisional practice license from KMPDC, that's the board. They are just seeking apprenticeship as required by the law to be registered as medical practitioners.
Yvonne, I think from the meeting, that's currently going on, I see an update that Head of Public Service Felix Koskei, CS's Moses Kuria, and KMPD officials